The Unrivaled president addresses Caitlin Clark potentially playing in the league. Now, I know most people absolutely do not want to see her play in this league. And I don't blame you, because it's a league made up of a bunch of stars, quote unquote, from the WNBA that really can't stand Caitlin Clark.
The basketball world just witnessed a shakeup that has the WNBA on edge. A rival league known as Unrivaled has skyrocketed to a jaw-dropping $30 million valuation, and the whispers around it are getting louder. Why? Because behind the numbers lies a tantalizing possibility: Caitlin Clark stepping onto their court.
If you're willing to play in the WNBA with all these people that can't stand you, then the Unrivaled's sort of the same situation. All right? Except, frankly, the Unrivaled may pay you a bigger salary to do it.
For the WNBA, Clark isn't just another rookie. She's the face of ticket sales, television ratings, and a new era of fans. But now, with Unrivaled dangling bigger paychecks and fresh exposure, the league feels cornered. What started as a side project created by players fed up with the system has quickly become a real threat to the establishment. And with new investors flooding in, Unrivaled isn't just knocking on the door, they're breaking it down. The question everyone's asking: could Caitlin Clark really be the piece that tips the balance of power?
Unrivaled president speaks about Caitlin Clark's dialogue. Unrivaled made a concerted effort to get Clark to play in 2025.
The rise of Unrivaled didn't happen overnight. What began as a bold experiment by frustrated WNBA players quickly evolved into a league that demanded attention. In its earliest stages, the project looked like nothing more than a small-scale alternative, a 3-on-3 league that many assumed wouldn't last beyond a season. But beneath the surface, there was a clear mission: to create a platform where women's basketball could thrive without the limitations of the WNBA's structure, salaries, and rigid control.
The thing I don't like about this damn league is it's 3-on-3. They desperately need to become a 5-on-5 league, in my opinion, if they want a chance to make it.
The founders wanted freedom, equity, and a bigger piece of the pie. And they weren't shy about making it happen. At first, critics mocked the idea. 3-on-3 basketball didn't have the same appeal as the traditional 5-on-5 game that fans had grown up watching. It felt more like a streetball showcase than a professional league. Skeptics doubted whether anyone would take it seriously, much less invest millions of dollars into something so expensive. But Unrivaled's organizers weren't banking on tradition. They were banking on energy, innovation, and the ability to give players what the WNBA often could not: higher pay, equity in the league, and more control over their careers.
Unrivaled, the women's professional 3-on-3 basketball league, said Monday it had closed a Series B investment round valuing the league at $340 million.
Then came the first big shockwave, a valuation leap that made people stop laughing. From humble beginnings, Unrivaled jumped to a staggering $30 million in worth. Investors didn't just take notice. They poured in serious money. Names like Serena Williams, Warner Brothers Discovery, and other high-profile backers suddenly gave the league credibility.
Serena Williams was included in the round of funding, while Warner Brothers Discovery and Alex Morgan's Tribe Ventures added to their previous investments in the league, so they added yet more money into the league.
No longer was it just a rebel project, it became a business with teeth. And just like that, the WNBA realized they weren't facing a gimmick. They were facing a real competitor. This was the turning point. The WNBA, already struggling with its own internal controversies, now had to contend with a rival league backed by big names and big money. The symbolism was clear if investors believed Unrivaled was worth betting on. It meant cracks were showing in the WNBA's foundation, and at the center of this battle stood Caitlin Clark. Clark wasn't officially tied to Unrivaled, but the mere mention of her name in connection with the league sent shockwaves. Everyone understood what her participation could mean.
Brazell said of discussions with Clark, he then added, everyone knows we want the best players. Everyone knows that if they're interested, we always have spots. So he's saying, if she wants to play, they will make sure she's got a place to play.
Clark had already proven to be a generational draw, boosting television ratings and selling out arenas wherever she played. If Unrivaled could lure her even for a season, it wouldn't just legitimize their product, it could potentially siphon attention, revenue, and fans away from the WNBA. For the WNBA, this was nothing short of a nightmare. They had invested heavily in making Clark the centerpiece of their growth strategy. She was the one player who could bridge the gap between hardcore fans and casual viewers. Losing her, even temporarily, would signal that the league couldn't protect its brightest star. And in professional sports, perception often matters more than reality. Unrivaled had done the unthinkable. They'd turned from an upstart idea into a looming threat, but this was only the beginning, because the money and investors were just part of the story. The real chaos would start when player loyalty and personal ambition collided. When news broke that Unrivaled's valuation had surged from the tens of millions to a solid $30 million mark, jaws dropped across the basketball world. To outsiders, it may have looked like just another round of sports financing. But to those who follow women's basketball closely, this number wasn't just financial, it was symbolic. It signaled that investors, advertisers, and powerful names in entertainment were ready to put their money behind something other than the WNBA for decades. The league had struggled to maintain relevance and profitability, often leaning on NBA subsidies and media deals to survive. Now here was a fresh competitor pulling in cash at a pace the WNBA couldn't ignore. The list of backers added even more fuel to the fire. Serena Williams, one of the most iconic athletes on the planet, was attached to the league through investment. Warner Brothers Discovery, a giant in the media industry, doubled down on their involvement, ensuring Unrivaled would have strong television and streaming backing. Even soccer star Alex Morgan's Tribe Ventures joined in. The message was loud and clear: this wasn't a vanity project anymore. It was a movement with serious capital and influential names. Speculation spread fast. Some even whispered that Google might have a hand in the investment pool, while those rumors couldn't be confirmed. They didn't have to be. The mere possibility of a tech giant circling around Unrivaled was enough to set fans and analysts buzzing. If true, it would mean access to deeper pockets, advanced marketing power, and the kind of mainstream legitimacy that could reshape the entire women's sports landscape. But what made this surge even more controversial was who wasn't investing. Neither the NBA nor the WNBA showed up in any capacity. According to reports, Unrivaled's founders had approached the WNBA early, offering opportunities for collaboration and shared ownership. The WNBA declined, viewing them as competitors rather than partners. It was a strategic decision that might now come back to haunt them. Here's where the conflict of interest deepens. Some of Unrivaled's co-founders are also high-ranking members of the WNBA Players Association. That means the same people negotiating the league's collective bargaining agreements are simultaneously building a rival league that promises higher pay and better conditions. For WNBA leadership, this felt like a betrayal. For players, it was an escape hatch. And for Caitlin Clark, it presented a fascinating dilemma, because as Unrivaled's value climbed, so did its ability to offer bigger contracts. Reports showed that new signees were already making salaries 4 times higher than their WNBA deals. Add equity stakes on top of that, and suddenly the WNBA's pay scale looked embarrassingly outdated. If the league wanted to keep its brightest stars, especially Clark, they would have to compete financially in a way they hadn't before. And that's the heart of the storm. $30 million wasn't just a valuation. It was a shot fired straight at the WNBA's pride, daring them to respond. Before players like Caitlin Clark decided to take matters into their own hands, at the heart of all this noise lies the Caitlin Clark dilemma. Few athletes in recent memory have carried as much weight on their shoulders as Clark. From her college days at Iowa to her explosive entry into the WNBA, she hasn't just been a player, she's been the engine that drives viewership, merchandise sales, and media coverage. Wherever she goes, crowds follow. Television ratings spike, social media buzzes. That kind of gravitational pull is rare, and both the WNBA and Unrivaled know it. For the WNBA, Clark is the crown jewel. She represents the league's future and its lifeline to a wider fan base that had been slipping away for years. But even as she became the face of the WNBA, there were cracks showing. Reports and fan speculations suggested that not all of her teammates, or even other stars around the league, welcomed her with open arms. Jealousy, competitiveness, and resentment seemed to bubble beneath the surface. After all, Clark was being celebrated as the savior of the sport, while veterans who had spent years grinding in relative obscurity felt overlooked. This tension made the possibility of her joining Unrivaled even more intriguing and more dangerous. For the WNBA on one hand, Unrivaled desperately wanted her. League president Alex Brazel made it no secret that Clark was at the top of their wish list. Her presence alone could multiply television ratings and bring in casual fans who wouldn't otherwise glance at a 3-on-3 format. On the other hand, Clark would be walking straight into a league founded by players who, in many cases, were her critics. It would be like stepping onto enemy turf and being asked to elevate it with her star power. Yet, the allure was obvious. Unrivaled promised bigger paychecks, equity ownership, and freedom. Imagine Clark being compensated not just as a player, but as a stakeholder in a rising sports property. That's the kind of opportunity athletes dream of, a chance to shape their own legacy while securing financial stability beyond the court. The WNBA could never match that, at least not under its current model. Still, Clark faced enormous pressure. To remain loyal, the WNBA had invested its marketing machine in her. Sponsors lined up to attach her name to campaigns. Fans looked at her as the future of the league, not just another athlete. Walking away even briefly could be seen as betrayal. It would also raise questions about the league's ability to hold on to its biggest attraction. And then came the bigger complication: timing. With whispers of a potential WNBA lockout or work stoppage, there was a chance Clark could spend nearly a year without competitive play. For a player so hungry to grow, sitting on the sidelines wasn't ideal. Unrivaled could offer her a solution: stay active, sharpen her game, and keep her name in headlines. The dilemma was clear: loyalty to the WNBA's shaky system, or a bold leap into the unknown with Unrivaled. Either way, the decision carried consequences that would ripple far beyond her own career. When the rumors of Caitlin Clark joining Unrivaled reached their peak, fans held their breath waiting for her decision. Would she break away from the WNBA and step into a league built by her fiercest critics? The answer, at least for now, was no. Clark ultimately declined Unrivaled's invitation, choosing instead to remain in Indianapolis and dedicate her offseason to training, conditioning, and refining her skills. On the surface, it looked like a safe, calculated move, a commitment to her WNBA career. But underneath, the decision revealed just how complicated her situation really was. Clark's refusal wasn't a rejection of Unrivaled's money or opportunities. It was a recognition of timing and optics. Jumping ship so early in her career would have ignited a firestorm. Headlines would have painted her as abandoning the WNBA after a single season. Feeding into the narrative that the league couldn't hold on to its stars, sponsors might have questioned her loyalty, and veteran players would have used her departure as proof of their worst fears, that Clark's meteoric rise was bigger than the league itself. By staying put, Clark avoided the backlash and maintained her image as committed to the WNBA's future. Another factor in her decision was the format itself. Clark has built her career in the 5-on-5 game, mastering its rhythm, spacing, and strategy. 3-on-3 basketball, while exciting in spurts, is fundamentally different. It's faster, more chaotic, and less structured. Many fans, including Clark herself, see it as a sideshow compared to the traditional game. While Unrivaled offered fame and fortune, it didn't offer the kind of competitive environment Clark needed to elevate her craft. If her ultimate goal is to dominate the WNBA and establish herself among the greatest of all time, committing to a format she doesn't believe in would be a distraction. The fans played their part as well. Social media lit up with commentary, and the overwhelming sentiment was clear. Supporters didn't want to see Clark lend legitimacy to her rivals. In their eyes, joining Unrivaled meant empowering the very players who resented her success. It would feel like handing her star power to those who had openly clashed with her on and off the court. 8 out of 10 comments across fan forums and YouTube channels voiced the same opinion. Stay with the WNBA. Don't build up a league designed to undermine you. Still, Clark Snow didn't close the door. If anything, it kept the tension. Alive, Unrivaled made it clear they would always have a spot waiting for her, no matter when she changed her mind. The league wasn't going anywhere, and as it gained more investors and more players, the offer would only grow harder to resist. Her decision to stay in Indianapolis may have calmed the storm temporarily, but the long-term questions remain. Could she continue shouldering the weight of a league where resentment lingers in the locker rooms? Or would the lure of freedom and higher pay eventually pull her toward Unrivaled? For now, Clark stayed loyal, but loyalty has its limits. While Caitlin Clark was the centerpiece of speculation, Unrivaled didn't slow down in building its roster and flexing its financial muscle. The league delivered a massive statement when Paige Bueckers, one of the brightest young stars in women's basketball, signed a 3-year deal that turned heads across the sports world. What shocked everyone wasn't just the signing itself, but the numbers behind it. Bueckers' first-year salary with Unrivaled alone was larger than her entire WNBA contract. That reality sent a powerful message to current and future players. The balance of power was shifting, and Unrivaled was willing to pay in ways the WNBA couldn't. To put things into perspective, Bueckers' WNBA contract with the Dallas Wings paid her under $80,000 for the season. With Unrivaled, her first year would earn her north of $340,000, nearly 4 times as much, and that was before considering the added perks of equity stakes and media exposure. For young athletes watching from the sidelines, the math was undeniable. Why grind through years of underpaid seasons in the WNBA when Unrivaled could provide immediate financial stability and ownership opportunities? This signing shook the foundation of the WNBA's recruiting pipeline. College stars, many of whom idolized Bueckers and Clark, began to wonder if Unrivaled might be the smarter long-term path. It wasn't just about money either. The league promised flexibility, modern branding, and a direct say in its future direction. That kind of empowerment was unheard of in traditional professional sports, where players often felt like cogs in a machine. Unrivaled positioned itself as the anti-establishment option, a place where athletes had leverage instead of limitations. The WNBA found itself in an uncomfortable position. For years, it had fought for legitimacy and fought against criticism of low attendance, weak ratings, and modest salaries. Clark's entry had given them a surge of momentum, but now Unrivaled was threatening to siphon that energy away by offering better paydays to her peers. Even if Clark stayed committed, the optics of other stars leaving created a new narrative. The WNBA might no longer be the top destination for women's basketball. For Clark, the ripple effect was impossible to ignore. With Bueckers securing such a lucrative deal, fans and analysts alike speculated that Unrivaled would eventually circle back with an even bigger offer tailored specifically for her. And unlike before, the financial gap would be so wide it would be hard to dismiss. Could she realistically justify turning down $500,000 or more in earnings for loyalty to a league that still underpaid its talent? The Bueckers deal became a turning point. It wasn't just about one player, it was about the future. If one superstar could secure 4 times her WNBA pay in Unrivaled, others would follow. And the longer Clark watched from the outside, the more pressure built for her to reconsider. Unrivaled had made its boldest move yet. And it forced a question the WNBA didn't want to hear. What happens when the money talks louder than loyalty? As Unrivaled's momentum grew, the WNBA found itself dragged into a silent but escalating war. On paper, the league insisted it wasn't worried, portraying Unrivaled as nothing more than a novelty act, built on 3-on-3 basketball. Behind closed doors, the tension was undeniable. The biggest red flag wasn't just the investors or the growing salaries, it was the overlapping leadership. Key WNBA stars, who were also serving as vice presidents of the Players Association, were simultaneously co-founders of Unrivaled. That meant the same people negotiating the WNBA's collective bargaining agreement were directly invested in the success of a rival league. To many observers, it wasn't just a conflict of interest, it was a ticking time bomb. The timing couldn't have been worse. The WNBA was already facing sensitive negotiations on a new CBA. Rumors swirled about the possibility of a lockout or strike, which could derail the 2025 season altogether. If that happened, Caitlin Clark and the league's other stars could find themselves sidelined for months, maybe even close to a year. That's where Unrivaled's pitch became almost irresistible. They weren't just offering higher pay, they were offering stability at a time when the WNBA couldn't guarantee anything. For an athlete in her prime, sitting out was the last thing Clark wanted. The irony wasn't lost on fans. Here was a league barely out of its first season, suddenly offering more security than the establishment that had existed for decades. Unrivaled made sure to frame itself as the future flexible contracts. Financial equity, player input, and big-name investors keeping the runway long. The WNBA, in contrast, looked stuck in the past, weighed down by bureaucracy, stubborn ownership, groups, and an outdated pay scale. This perception battle mattered almost as much as the money. Sports leagues thrive on narrative, and the story forming around Unrivaled was dangerous for the WNBA. It wasn't just about the product on the court anymore. It was about which league gave players a voice, which league respected their value, and which league could attract new fans hungry for something fresh. And in every one of those categories, Unrivaled was winning the argument. For Caitlin Clark, this silent war created a perfect storm. On one side, the WNBA desperately needed her to stand firm, to be their proof that the league could still retain its brightest attraction. On the other side, Unrivaled had all the leverage, the investors, the contracts, and the growing sense of inevitability. If even one season was disrupted by labor issues, Clark could easily justify making the jump. Fans wouldn't see it as betrayal, they'd see it as survival. The WNBA's leaders knew it too. Every new dollar raised by Unrivaled and every rumor of unrest in the WNBA's labor talks only deepened the pressure. This wasn't just a question of competition anymore. It was a fight for control of the future of women's basketball, and then came the spark that made this simmering feud impossible. To ignore a public statement from Unrivaled's president that put Caitlin Clark directly back in the spotlight. When Unrivaled's president, Alex Brazel, finally addressed the Caitlin Clark question directly, the temperature of the entire debate spiked. In a carefully measured interview, he admitted what everyone already knew. Clark wasn't just on their radar, she was at the very top of their wish list. Brazel made it clear that Unrivaled would always have a spot waiting for her, no matter the timing. His exact words carried a subtle but powerful challenge. Everyone knows we want the best players. Everyone knows that if they're interested, we always have spots. That statement did more than just confirm interest. It placed the WNBA in a defensive position. The league could no longer pretend that Unrivaled was irrelevant or incapable of drawing its biggest star. Instead, it now had to live with the reality that another league was openly courting its most valuable player, and doing it in front of the media spotlight. For fans, it confirmed what had been whispered for months. Caitlin Clark's future wasn't locked down. Brazel's comments also fueled speculation about what Clark could mean for Unrivaled's television ratings. Analysts argued that her participation could easily double or even triple viewership numbers. For a league still in its infancy, that kind of boost would be revolutionary. And it wasn't just about ratings. Clark's name drew sponsors, merchandise sales, and mainstream attention in ways no other player in the women's game could. By simply keeping the door open, Brazel turned Clark into the biggest what-if storyline in sports. The reaction was immediate. Supporters of Unrivaled flooded social media with excitement, picturing Clark's debut in the league as the ultimate crossover moment. For them, the chance to see her in a fresh environment, away from WNBA politics, was thrilling, but just as loud were the voices of resistance. Loyal WNBA fans saw Brazel's statement as an act of poaching, a deliberate attempt to destabilize their league by dangling riches in front of its brightest star. The battle lines between the two fan bases grew sharper, and Clark, without saying a word, became the lightning rod in the middle. For Clark herself, Brazel's comments added another layer of pressure. Even if she had no immediate plans to leave the WNBA, the fact that Unrivaled kept her name alive in the conversation meant she could never fully escape the speculation. Every time she struggled on the court, questions would resurface. What if she were playing somewhere else? Every offseason, the same debate would come roaring back. Will she stay or will she go? The WNBA's silence in response spoke volumes. They knew that directly addressing the issue would only legitimize the threat. But fans weren't fooled. They saw the unease in every headline, every whisper from insiders, every contract negotiation pushed into the spotlight. Brazel's words did more than invite Clark to play. They reframed the entire conversation. It was no longer just about one star's loyalty. It was about whether the WNBA could withstand the temptation Unrivaled had placed in front of her. A temptation that was growing harder to ignore with each passing season. With Unrivaled surging in value and its president openly inviting Caitlin Clark to join, the stage was set for one of the most dramatic crossroads in women's basketball history. For Clark, the decision was no longer a distant hypothetical. It was becoming an unavoidable choice between loyalty and opportunity. And for the WNBA, the consequences of that choice could either reinforce its dominance or trigger an existential crisis. On one side stood the WNBA, a league with decades of history but plagued by low attendance, modest salaries, and lingering locker room resentment. Clark had already breathed new life into it, boosting television ratings and creating a surge of interest unseen in years. To stay meant continuing the uphill battle to legitimize the league, carrying the weight of expectation on her shoulders. It meant being the face of not just her team, but of an entire sport fighting for relevance. On the other side stood Unrivaled, brash and unproven, but undeniably ambitious. Their financial backing was impressive, their investor list glittered with star power, and their contracts blew the WNBA's offers out of the water. Beyond the money, there was the appeal of freedom, a league built by players, for players, where Clark could have not only influence but ownership. The idea of shaping a new basketball frontier from the ground up was seductive. She wouldn't just be an athlete, she could be a pioneer. The fan divide mirrored the weight of her decision. Loyalists to the WNBA begged her to stay. Abandoning the league would be handing victory to her detractors. They argued that the only way to truly cement her legacy was to elevate the WNBA into the mainstream, even if it meant enduring resistance and jealousy along the way. Meanwhile, others urged her to take control of her destiny. Why should she sacrifice her prime years for a system that undervalued her? Why not embrace a league that respected her worth and gave her a chance to thrive on her own terms? But the truth is, Clark's decision won't just shape her career. It will reshape the landscape of women's basketball altogether. If she stays, the WNBA has a chance to solidify itself, leaning on her star power to negotiate stronger media deals and finally address pay disparities. If she leaves, Unrivaled could instantly vault into legitimacy, forcing the WNBA into the shadows of its own making. Either way, the ripple effects will be felt for years. What makes the situation even more volatile is timing. The looming threat of a WNBA work stoppage means Clark might soon face a season of uncertainty. If forced to sit out months of competition, the pressure to cross over would be overwhelming. And with every investor dollar Unrivaled collects, the offers will only grow harder to refuse. The basketball world now waits in suspense. Caitlin Clark isn't just choosing between two leagues, she's choosing the future of the sport itself, and whichever path she takes will change everything. Caitlin Clark now finds herself at the center of a storm bigger than any game she has ever played. Unrivaled's rise to a $30 million valuation and its relentless pursuit of her has turned what should be a simple career choice into a defining moment for the future of women's basketball. The WNBA needs her loyalty to sustain its growth, while Unrivaled dangles the promise of higher pay, ownership, and a clean slate free from old resentments. No matter which way she leans, the decision carries consequences that extend far beyond her personal journey. Stay, and she continues to shoulder the burden of elevating a league that often undervalues its stars. Leave, and she risks legitimizing her rivals while pioneering a new frontier. Either way, Caitlin Clark's next move won't just decide her legacy. It will rewrite the balance of power in women's basketball.